let's get started with our panel. All these people are known to you, and they may be a tad nervous because sitting at that table is Mr. Kern, the boss, taking notes. You know, unlike other professions, I don't believe there's that word tenure. But anyways, people want to know why the Tribune comes for the post-election analysis, and of course the reason is 1948. So, what? What?
Well, actually, technically, that was a post-election.
It was post-election. It was either that or doing a Mike Madigan joke, and with all these trip people here, I just didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go there. By the way, is the speaker here? Oh, okay. Probably counting all his new members. Well, the election's over, and I'm on record as saying it really does look good for Barack Obama. So to do that, let's start off and... Oh, good, Jeff. Jeff, you're not going to get any applause, so just... No, Jeff. You don't want to quadruple your audience. Here we go. Starting off, Christi Parsons, as you may have seen yesterday on television, asking not one but two questions of the president. And you say, well, pretty impressive, Christi. However, I knew you when you were working in Springfield in the smoke-filled room led by Rick Pearson. That is education by ordeal. So, Christi, you're up first, and 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Yes, that time in Springfield made me, and also took probably about 10 years off my life. And I'm looking at people who were in that room, may or may not have been smoking, but were there. And I appreciate all that I learned from them. In fact, I was talking to Chris Long over lunch about how the Obama campaign solicited money from her, dragged, I think, quite a bit more money out of her than she was planning to give during the course of the campaign. And I learned a little something about how they did that, and I have the feeling sitting in this room that there are people here who know an awful lot more about the Obama campaign and how it operated than I do. So please form a line outside as I'll take you in order. But I cover the White House for the Chicago Tribune and the other papers in the Tribune chain, and my time covering Barack Obama goes back to my time in the state legislature, which conveniently covered the period of time that he was there. And then I covered the statewide and went to Washington and covered Congress with a heavy emphasis on 2 or 3 members who were headed toward the White House. So you've all watched this campaign. I watched it every day for the past 6 months. I spent a lot of time traveling with the candidate, and when I wasn't traveling with the candidate, I tried to get out and see how the network on the ground was operating, which I think will be one of the most interesting things we remember about this campaign as time goes by. You know, it really was a choice election, I think, the way both sides really tried to frame the presidential election, but it came down to, it was a very close election. Regardless of which side you were on, you had reason to hope for a win on that night last week, and it really came down to who was able to turn out their voters, and I think the Obama operation was really kind of historic in the way that they did that, and it's definitely worth studying and worth talking about for anyone who's interested. Someone was bemoaning the fact to me the other day that we don't talk about big issues when we're electing elected officials, and I often disagree, but I really heartily disagreed this time, because I think this was a campaign about philosophy, and we had a great debate. I really enjoyed paying attention to both campaigns on that and what both candidates articulated when we talked about we talked about economic philosophy and immigration and how we're going to deal with this mess at the end of this year. It's clear that we don't agree. We're split right down the middle, and I don't think anyone's really can claim to have a mandate here, but we've got a great debate and a lot of people really engaged. So it's an exciting time to be covering politics and government and the White House. So I look forward to hearing your questions and answering what I can.
Okay, kind of couched in Washingtonian terms there. Yeah. Well, speaking of Washington, we have another expatriate. Some of us knew Clarence back when. Just flew in, just for us, the Honorable Clarence Page. Round of applause. I forgot to give Christi a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. You are entirely too kind. I'm delighted to be here today. I think
Excuse me, Clarence. You were the first person to ever say that, but go ahead.
Cherish it, believe me. But, no, I think it was Eisenhower who said that war will always amaze you. I say elections will always surprise you. And the big surprises for me this election were along the lines of what Christi was saying, that there were big issues here. This was really a historic campaign in terms of dealing with historic issues and historic turning points from the issues that had to be dealt with, foreign and domestic, the electorate itself changing, the demographics catching up with my prediction. This would be America's first truly multiracial, multicultural century, and a lot of people ignored that to the detriment, as it turned out, of the Romney campaign on Election Day, and now a new debate has started. But the first important surprise, I think, was the energized Republican base. I expected, because of the great pendulum swing that American politics take, that the enthusiasm and excitement of Obama 2008 would be followed by a big conservative swing in 2010. Nobody predicted the Tea Party. But nobody predicted Sarah Palin either. Life is full of surprises. And I'm still sticking by my prediction that the Tea Party wouldn't last two presidential election cycles. This goes back to, I think it was H.L. Mencken who said that populist movements are like bees. They sting and then they die. And we're seeing that with the Tea Party already. However, populist movements don't just die completely. Their ideas live on. Populist movements on the left influence the Democratic Party agenda that we see today, and populist movements on the right influence the Republican agenda. And this goes back to everybody from William Jennings Bryan to George Wallace to more modern times, Pat Buchanan and Ralph Nader. All of these movements influenced our politics, and we're seeing that happen now. The Tea Party helped energize the base, but it also pushed the party to the right so far that it came up with candidates in the primaries over the last couple of years that were losers in the general. And that is something that's being evaluated now in Republican ranks. Team Obama countered with a campaign strategy that was geared toward, first, as David Axelrod said early on, they knew there was going to be a less enthusiasm this time on their side. There was going to be a much tighter race. And what we saw emerge was a campaign focused on the Republican, quote, war on women. And a number of Republicans cooperated with that by giving the impression that there really was. And at the same time, also a war on undocumented immigrants that was perceived negatively among Hispanic voters who turned out in a record swing toward the Democrats. That also, we can talk more about that, but the third big surprise was in regard to pollsters. Not that we have them. Pollsters are inevitable. And what was interesting this time was how much they dominated the process. And I think that that's something, that's a genie that's out of the bottle and is not going to go back in. There are so many polls now that we now rank pollsters of pollsters. And the big superstar in this game now is Nate Silver. Of Nate Silver 538, which the New York Times, the Gray Lady, has incorporated that into their structure. And Silver got a lot of attention because back in 2008, he called all 35 Senate races and 49 out of the 50 state turnouts for the presidential race correctly. He missed Indiana by only 1 percentage point. And this year, the latest tally I've seen, Forbes magazine said he got 100%, all 50 states this time. So I know his book's going to sell well. I can see it zooming up. I can see it zooming up Amazon right now, right next to General Petraeus' girlfriend's. In any case, well, polls now, it's not just a matter of making me nervous, because every day, I mean, the last couple of cycles now as the election nears, every morning I wake up and I look at the polls and the polls of polls, and I'm either going to have a happy day or not. I just will really, I said I wasn't going to let it happen to me this time, but it has. Now the election is over. I feel halfway human again, I'm happy to say. But polls also have a big influence on who gets money. And money is driving our campaigns, of course, more than ever. The super PACs were a big story this time. People everywhere were either outraged or delighted by super PACs, mostly outraged from folks I was running into, especially if the super PAC they were outraged at was not supporting a cause that they believed in. Now, I'm sure many people are going to be asking about the value of this. Particularly Karl Rove is going to be asking this question, as other people ask questions of Karl Rove, who has become the embodiment of this symbolizing the whole super PAC rise. And he didn't get much for the money that he raised, was the bottom line in the end. And so I think I'm happy to say that, you know, one of the things that makes me proud to be an American is how, what like Churchill said, Americans will do the right thing after all the alternatives have been exhausted. So as much as I may quarrel with the Citizen United decision, et cetera, now I think in the end we saw over the last 2 or 3 elections, we got to take them all as a trend or as indicators of where the country's going. The public does rise up. We're still basically a 50-50 nation. And that means we have tight races, and I have nervous mornings looking at the polls. But it also means that, at least in our national politics, the incumbents can't just take everybody for granted. You can have a great victory now, and that victory may not last because the public will rise up and eventually catch up with you. So again, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to your questions and comments.
Okay. Thank you, Clarence, and Churchill, H.L. Mencken. Using this as in one of those little supper clubs, huh?
I have a great relation with Bartlett's quotations.
Very good. And of course, Nate Silver is I was telling Bruce, the ultimate arrogant University of Chicago graduate who's going to make a fortune now and just promote himself all over. You just saw him on Channel 11. He's now going into food, beer. Who says this isn't a great country? Kerry, you're up.
Okay. Hi. I'm Kerry Luft. I'm the Nation and World editor for the Tribune. And for the first 2 years of the Obama administration, I was Tribune Company's bureau chief in Washington, but I missed Chicago too much, so I came screaming back here.
I blame you a bit, by the way.
My job was to for this election was to coordinate coverage with our Washington bureau and our sister paper, the LA Times, to assign and edit stories that we did locally with national import, and on election night help Mr. Kern and our managing editor, Jane Hurt, prevent the comeback of President Dewey. One of the bad trends, I think, in political coverage and punditry is the rush towards sweeping generalizations as soon as the election is over. And one of the things that we're hearing now is that the Republican Party is in deep trouble and that the Democrats may well hold on to the presidency for some time to come. And while it's undeniable that the Republicans have some work to do, but like most sweeping early assessments, saying that the GOP is finished is, in my opinion, silly. I want to look back 6 years ago where 2 former colleagues of ours, Clarence and Christi and mine, Tom Hamburger and Peter Walston, 2 of the finest political journalists in the country, they wrote a book called One Party Country that examined George Bush's reelection, the relative strength of the GOP in both houses of Congress, some demographic trends that were friendly to the GOP, and Karl Rove's widely hailed organizational ground game genius, and they concluded that the U.S. was about to swing Republican for the foreseeable future. Well, with all due respect to my buddies, that didn't work out. Now we're hearing that the Democratic trends favor the Democrats and will continue to do so. That the Democrats have elected their own incumbent, which is true. And the last we heard from Mr. Rove, he was still saying that it was too soon to call Ohio. And he was getting ready to make some rather uncomfortable calls to donors to his super PAC. So here's the reality. President Obama did win more than 90% of the African American vote and more than 70% of the Hispanic vote, according to exit polls, and he also did extremely well among women. The current demographic trends in the United States suggest that states like Georgia and Arizona will, in years to come, have populations that on the surface will appear to be far more friendly to Democrats. And some red states in the middle of the country, the Dakotas, Nebraska, and such, will experience population decline, losing votes in the Electoral College. At the moment, the Democrats appear to have a significant, and I mean really significant, edge in the technological expertise that allows them to identify and motivate voters, even in the most red areas of the country. That is what allowed President Obama to win Virginia in 2008 and 2012 by going into red areas and winnowing out the people who might be inclined to support him and getting them to vote. And truth be told, if she chooses to run, Hillary Clinton would be a formidable opponent for any Republican. Probably she would be the presumptive favorite right out of the box. That is tough sledding for the GOP going forward. But there are some real presumptions in that demographics as destiny model. First of all, it presumes that Hispanics, blacks, and women will remain a relatively monolithic vote, and that's not necessarily the case. It also presumes that Georgia and Arizona will swing more than 10% in the other direction, at least in the next 4 years. I mean, Governor Romney won those states handily. It also presumes that the GOP cannot evolve to appeal to portions of those groups. For starters, they might compromise on immigration reform, which would be very popular with some Latino voters. George Bush did very well among African Americans in 2004. That can be, that can change. And it also presumes that the GOP will continue to nominate polarizing candidates, and we're already seeing the pushback. Bobby Jindal of Louisiana just this week gave an interview to Politico where he criticized dumbed-down conservatism and candidates who hurt the GOP brand by making bizarre and offensive comments, and we all know who he was referring to. For all of his vaunted surge post the Denver debate, Governor Romney never was fully embraced by the electorate. According to exit polls by the Pew Research Center, only 60% of his supporters said they were voting for him as opposed to voting against President Obama, which is not good. But still, what we know from polling, and polling is accurate, this race was a victory for pollsters nationwide. Americans tend to remain in favor of smaller government and lower taxes, but they do support abortion rights generally and immigration reform, and we're seeing growing support at the polls even for same-sex marriage. So there's some ideological room for the GOP to maneuver, and there are many, many popular GOP governors out there. Mr. Jindal, Governor Christi. 4 more years of a struggling economy could throw everything up for grabs. We don't know what will happen. I'm sure everybody hopes for an improving economy, but if it doesn't get better, that would play very well for a GOP message. And so is the GOP dead? Not by a long shot. Too early to tell.
Okay. Moderator holds back. Now, the editor, the man in charge, the man who too easy. I won't go there. I won't go there. I said I wouldn't go there. I'm not going to go there. Bruce Dold.
Go ahead. Where were you going to go?
The man who really fired Madigan. They left out a word. Up.
This was a heartening election before I ran into Paul. The Tribune endorsed Barack Obama It wasn't a popular decision in some quarters. I think it was about an hour after we posted the endorsement online that someone sent me a photo of a T-shirt. Paul, you're in academia. You'll like this.
I am, sir.
A photo of a T-shirt that said, "I'd rather take a shower at Penn State than vote for Obama."
You win.
You're not going to get this at the Economic Club, let me tell you.
That was after the woman who called me and said, "How could you endorse him for re-election? He's going to legalize prostitution." We could have gotten into a state-federal argument on that. There was one that actually thought that was uplifting. It was the one who called and said we shouldn't have endorsed Obama because after the election he was going to convert to Islam and take 20 million Americans with him. I saw this as a sign of progress because she didn't think that he was already a secret Muslim. But bottom line, I got to say, this endorsement was the reaction was milder than in 2008 and in 2004, so maybe a sign of progress. I want to, Kerry and Christi and Clarence talked about the national situation. I want to make a plea for the state that goes to Paul's unfortunate crack at the beginning. So everybody agrees that November 6th was a good day for Democrats, no question about it. I would argue that June 3rd was a better day for Democrats. I'm talking about June 3rd, 2011. That's the day that Governor Quinn signed the legislative remap for Illinois after saying that he wanted a fair and competitive map. So Democrats will have 71 members of the Illinois House. How many of those people do you think actually had to have an election? 32. 39 members of the House had no opponent in this general election. There were more than a dozen seats that were even truly competitive in the House. It's much the same in the Senate. So the Democrats will have 40 seats in the Senate. 18 of those seats were not at all, there was no Republican opponent. Now you can go on the other side too and say in some cases that Republicans also had no opposition in many of their seats. The point is that the state is locked up politically, and the state is financially still in a disaster zone. Now I don't want you to think this is a plea to stop Democrats, because while all the Democrats in Illinois were chortling about how crafty they were in drawing the map, they took themselves out of a chance to take the U.S. House because of remapping. 600,000 more people voted for Democrats for the U.S. House than Republicans. So if there was a popular vote for the U.S. House, the Democrats would have won. But then you look at Republicans controlled more legislatures, and thus they controlled more remapping in the states, and thus they kept the U.S. House. So who loses in all of that? Well, you do. With whatever state that you're in, when you get that kind of locked up election before you even vote, nobody gets served very well, I think. Ohio Republicans, what happened in Ohio? Barack Obama carries the presidency. Democratic senator carries the Senate. 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats in the U.S. House out of Ohio because Republicans controlled the remapping there. So anybody can argue fairness. What you got to do, you've got to get those who control. This may be a fool's errand, but what you really need to do is to get those in control, to give up some of that power and give it back to folks. Now look at California. There are 5 states that have some kind of bipartisan or nonpartisan remapping. California had its first run at an interesting system this time, where the map was drawn to be truly competitive. And you also had, in primaries, you could have 2 Democrats come out of a primary. You could have 2 Republicans come out of a primary. So 5 districts in California had a Democrat versus a Democrat. 2 races were Republican versus Republican. You got a lot more newcomers elected to Congress in California. You got a genuinely competitive race in maps. That system actually worked pretty well. Imagine if we'd had that kind of a whatever party runoff in the 2nd congressional district. You might have actually had an election in November if Jesse Jackson Jr. had to face a Democrat. So politics is locked up. Jerry Sturmer today. Judy, get ready. Jerry Sturman today announced that the governor wants a massive borrowing program.
No.
You just made news. There you go. Pay attention to what the Civic Committee said yesterday. $8 billion in unpaid bills, the worst financial situation of any state in the country. But we can all kind of laugh about the election results. I'll stop there.
Well, thanks for putting us in a great mood, Bruce. Round of applause. Round of applause. Come on. So, where's Miss Brenda? If you have a question, just raise your hand. Miss Brenda will pass. There you go. I'll start it off and just throw it out because I believe it. My question is very simple. Was this election, after the convention, ever in doubt, including Romney's performance in the first debate? Was the election ever in doubt? Christi?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was. I mean, a lot of people don't really didn't think the race was as close or was as the margin was as big as it looked going into that presidential debate, that there was some inevitable tightening up of the race that had to take place just based on how the country looks at politics. And so by those lights, you know, maybe it was the occasion of the debate, maybe it was the debate itself, but things tightened up right then. But then it sort of became a self-fulfilling prophecy a bit. It gave Mitt Romney some momentum. I think it was clear, and you definitely saw the Obama folks reacting to try to arrest that, because they didn't want that narrative to take hold, and for people like Carol to stop taking their, you know, or Chris, sorry, to stop giving money when they sent out their emails asking for it. You know, those sort of things were really important to them, and they knew that it was a really tight race. And so I really think that even a week and a half out, both sides were very concerned about the outcome. And there was a sophisticated analytics team at work for the Obama operation, and so I think they had an acute understanding of the numbers and where their voters were and how things were going. I think at the last minute there were some maybe inadvisable investments of money by the Romney campaign that maybe just because they didn't quite know where their voters were and they didn't have the experience in assigning buying ads and that this 5-year-old Obama operation did. But I do think that the best thing that probably happened to the president was that hurricane that came through and sort of froze everything. The conversation stopped, as you all remember. I'm sure you were paying attention. That conversation stopped being about politics and was about, to the extent that it was about the candidates, it was about leadership and demeanor and bearing. And, you know, that was a really critical week when there still could have been some movement. But I remember being out on the campaign trail with the senior, some senior staff in the Obama campaign, and I just sort of felt the wind shift suddenly. I could tell that their tone changed. Suddenly they weren't so intense in all their interactions with the press that was traveling with them. And looking back on it, people have told me, yeah, that's when the numbers came in. It was sort of midweek, and they felt like if they could just, you know, if there were no enormous events between Wednesday or Thursday and Election Day, that it was probably going to stay right about the numbers that they were telling me, even state by state. So, but to answer your question, yeah, I really think we had a real race all fall, and a real debate that went with it.
We'll have to wait for some of the books to come out. Then the magic word is micro-targeting, which, if you don't know, that is the new code word for these guys. And well,
Christi's probably heard this at the White House, but folks who were on the campaign or in the White House were saying after the first debate, that the president has a troubling flaw. He likes to spike the ball on the 5-yard line. And they've seen that not just at that debate, but in other things. When he thinks he's got something wrapped up, you might coast a little bit. And I think that's what happened here, and he learned his lesson.
And I think, too, what happened in that first debate was, if you recall, the Democrats were coming off a very successful convention. You know, Bill Clinton brought down the House. People were, Alex Castellanos says on CNN, this might have been the night when Barack Obama clinched his re-election, and Obama hadn't even spoken yet. Peggy Noonan was writing about the implosion of the Romney campaign, and the finger-pointing had already begun. Well, and then out comes Romney, who does a really nice job on that first debate. And I think a lot of people's minds were changed because all of a sudden they saw him as plausible, and Barack Obama is not inevitable. And that change, that was the surge, saying, I can live with this man.
Okay, we got a lot of questions.
Also, if I may add just 2 cents, it's very easy to say after the election that it was never in doubt. Just ask President Dewey. But the polling was pretty consistent that it was running tight, even with all of our hyperventilation in the media at various points. There was a remarkable consistency to the national polling of being very close, but Barack Obama slightly ahead, although within the margin of error. And then you had, in the battleground states, he stayed much more consistently ahead. The problem was most of us just couldn't believe the polls. I mean, you only believe them just so far, but then you remember all the races that turned out the other way, or surprises at the end. Well, like I said, there was very accurate polling, but the question was who you believe, which polling you believed, and whether or not you were spiking the ball too soon.
Okay, we're going to turn this, before this becomes a faculty meeting, which, goes on forever, we're going to have specific questions for short answers. And Clarence, this is to you, and we're not kissing up. This is from
Mr. Short Answer, that's me.
Well, you're gonna love this question. In fact, I will give you the card. Ann McKibben, where are you? There she is. For Clarence Page, Nate Silver says, and you know now when you use Nate Silver, you have been, let me read this again. Nate Silver says that that your prediction rate among pundits on the McLaughlin group was the best. What is your secret?
Well, my secret is that the fact that nobody ever actually goes back later on to find out who was right and who wasn't. And so it's inevitable that I'm just going to be terrific because it doesn't mean anything. Other than that, I suppose the best part of it is that I never allow myself to get too involved in Washington society, as seductive as it can be, since it's the only place on the planet that gives us far more respect in the media, that is, than we deserve.
Good answer. All right, Kerry, Christi, this is for you, because this is Washington. Christi, this is from Jerry Lathero, is that close? Illinois Trial Lawyers Association. Do you think Boehner will be less influenced by the Tea Party wing of the GOP in the next 2 years?
I think he'll be less influenced, but I think people who think he's about to turn his back on them are mistaken. I think that, there is, you could see throughout the fall, I'm sure you were paying attention, as as Republicans sort of started laying the groundwork for the work that would have to be done after a re-election of Barack Obama if he were re-elected. You heard Jim DeMint, who's widely considered the head of the Tea Party, to be saying that we're going to have to deal on taxes in order to avert these huge spending cuts at the end of the year. So I think that when leaders like that begin to adopt that posture, I don't think it's nearly as conciliatory as it looked in Washington this past week. But I do think that the Tea Party members are going to come around to some degree, or at least that Boehner's going to try to push them a little bit harder than he did during the 2011 debt ceiling talks. I just think the stakes are that great. And I also think, while I said earlier that I don't think the president came out of this election with a mandate, I do think he's got a little bit of wind at his back. People are still sort of paying attention to their newly reelected president to see what he's going to do. And he's got a bully pulpit, which we all know he knows generally how to use, right? The man can put some words together and make sentences that people clap for, and he can get a camera turned on him, especially now, especially during this next couple of months. So I do think that the real threat here is that if Republicans, including Tea Party members, feel like they're going to get the blame for whatever, the expiration of all of the tax cuts at the end of this year, they may be in more of a mood to deal. So I think I'm predicting continued gridlock with maybe a little more play in the joints.
Okay, well, we'll know when he gives a speech, and Cantor and Ryan and McCarthy are behind him if he keeps looking like this. And if he gives a speech on March 15th, my old look. Okay, Dr. Raju, this is for Kerry. Quick answer. How much did President Clinton contribute to the re-election of Barack Obama?
Wow. He was definitely his best surrogate out there. I would say it was considerable, and the ads that he cut were quite effective, I thought. I didn't, you know, we were lucky. We didn't see that many ads. But if you were watching a Packer or a Lions game, ooh, you probably got bombarded. But I thought he was quite a significant.
Chris Christi or Bill Clinton, who was more significant?
Chris Christi.
Okay. Timing is everything.
Chris Christi.
So when you're the governor, there's a hurricane. You kiss up to the president no matter what the damn election's coming up, but that's a different issue. Okay, Deborah, is that Zwayer? Where are you, Deborah?
Back in the back.
Keep asking good questions. You move on up. I want you to know. This is for Bruce Dold. What do you think will, I'll paraphrase, what do you think will happen now? Will there be a resurrection of the Simpson-Bowles Commission?
Well, I look at it as the Simpson-Bowles Tribune plan now, because we basically endorsed a long editorial today. That's where you need to go, and I think that's the way you could do something that would be face-saving for both sides. Mitt Romney actually had a pretty good idea in saying, don't go after tax rates, go after deductions and set a cap on deductions. Now, he wanted to cut rates by 20%, so you would have had to take out a lot of money just to get back to even. But I think where they could wind up thinking where both sides could be okay with say, keep rates where they are or drop them a little and put a cap, 18–25% on deductions. Most of that still does come out of the pockets of wealthier people. But you haven't, the Republicans can cross that, I think, without touching rates.
Okay. Well, Bruce, you know, after that KUKD, as we like to call it, kiss up, kick down, we move on. 2 quick questions for you. Illinois questions. First, from Bob Manwith, retired WGN superstar. Will the General Assembly lame duck session do anything on pension reform?
I was talking to Tony Preckwinkle earlier in the week at a dinner about this. I think she's pretty pessimistic, and the county really needs help. Now, it could be that means that the municipal piece of it doesn't get attached. I guess I'm more pessimistic than optimistic just based on past performance.
Another quick one. This is from Mary Bridget Hayes. Her job, for her employment, she writes, Democrat. All right.
From LaGrange.
We're nonpartisan here. Question, how do we get more qualified judges?
So, can I ask a show of hands? How many people paid attention? How many voted in the judges and actually cast an informed vote?
Cut out the Tribune, bad 6.
Right. So you look at an election, say Cook County, retention ballot, 780,000 people automatically voted yes on the judges. 200-some thousand automatically voted no. 180,000 people are the people in this room who paid attention. Well, that's a pretty good number. I think between the Tribune endorsement and the bar groups, we did move 180,000 people. But it gets you from, it gets you down to about 62 or 63%. It doesn't defeat a bad judge. And when I saw Tony Preckwinkle, I was giving her a hard time about this because she did a robocall endorsing all of the judges. And I think that was a real mistake on her part. So I was trying to. One thing you could do if we're going to have to keep this system, I think the Democratic Party has to do on retention what it tends to do on the partisan elections. Say, all right, we will endorse a candidate if the bar groups approve. You got to get the Democratic Party to start drawing some distinctions between good and bad judges. Otherwise, you just have to get rid of. You just got to get rid of the elective system and go to merit selection.
Okay, Clarence. This is Ruth, neighborhood capital. How do you pronounce your last name? Warren. Correct. Told you, Jay, we need more Irish guys here. O'Brien, Doyle, simple names. Here we go. Clarence, future of Citizens United. Can it be overturned?
Oh, that's a hell of a legal question as far as overturning it does. One group I do not make predictions on is the Supreme Court, because they make a profession out of surprising you. Just look at the Obamacare decision. But I think I have heard legal experts who've said that, who've had good arguments for doing it. But I don't expect that if it were to happen, and I'm not optimistic in those terms, I'm not sure, number one, well, I don't expect it to happen very soon, and number two, I'm not convinced that any alternative would be any better. Because quite frankly, before Citizens United, we essentially said that you're limited in how much money you can spend unless you're fabulously wealthy spending on your own campaign. Or right now, it's like, if you're not in the campaign, but, well, speech, what money is speech, and therefore you can't put limits on it. That doesn't sound very good, but it's also a recognition of a certain reality, too, that money does talk in politics and elsewhere. The thing is that with Citizens United, look at the volume of money that we've got now. Like the floodgates are open. So I'm in favor of measures that would tamp things down somewhat, but I don't know of any measure that would do that without in some way also tilting the playing field as well. So that's the kind of quandary that the courts are in as well as everybody else. So I guess I'm not really that optimistic about any kind of real serious reform happening very soon.
Okay. Christi, this is from Henry Henderson. Henry, where are you? Henry, where are you? All right. I can't see that. I'm already confessing with that light. Clean energy. I'll just shorten this. Christi, is clean energy, besides the usual windmills and all the other stuff they talk about, is the president going to make any move on that seriously?
I do think he will. I think that it's hard to predict right now how high a priority that is for him. He did in his news conference yesterday talk about climate change a little bit, but I think it didn't look like the highest. I think there are a lot of things in line before that. I also think the possibility of investment in being able to influence that industry through investment right now. I don't know that we're looking at a stimulus package in the near future. That said, I think it forms sort of. It's very important to him and to his base, basically, and I think he's, it won't be long before he's looking at buffing his legacy, and I think that he's going to have to take some sort of action on that. I just can't say from here what happens beyond. I think we're looking at about 9 months before he can talk seriously about real action on clean energy.
Okay, this is for Kerry from Joe Thornton. I'll shorten it. The whole question deals with fact-checking and deliberate lies and misinformation from campaign super PACs. How does one deal with that? Or as he says, is it our responsibility just to ignore the noise, or can the traditional press play a different or better role?
Well, we can always do a better role. There's more fact-checking out there than ever before. This past year, the Tribune partnered with the PolitiFact organization and ran a lot of their copy. There are other factcheck.org, and we try to do more than ever before in our coverage to fact check and truth tell as much as possible. One of the things that has changed dramatically in the past 15 years is the cacophony that's out there, and you could be checking facts all day and all night and still not get to the base answer. I mean, we've gone at the birth certificate question at least a half dozen times that I know of. We've gone at, keep going, So, yeah, we can do more. We should do more. There's never enough fact-checking to be done, but there's also more versions of the facts out there than ever before.
Good answer. Okay, Bruce. I had to save this for next to last. And the last one, you'll all have a chance to give your closing statement.
And we're out of time.
Closing statements. No, this is a Candy Crowley question for you. What? As someone said, she did the equivalent of a boxing referee throwing a punch. Okay, here we go. See, right off the bat, we got them all together. Nancy Cohn. Nancy, where are you? Boy, only the people in the back. You guys in front, you're going to lose this status. I want you to know that. Consultant and for Democratic progressives. This is to Mr. Dold. How do you weigh policy positions and endorsement decisions? For instance, the Tribune is known as a critic of the Speaker Madigan, and an advocate for pension reform. How do these fit in with your failure to endorse Elaine Niekritz, who held these positions? Boy, what a way to sandbag somebody at the end, right? You're at the City Club.
Thank you, Nancy. That was probably the most difficult decision that we made in the House races. Krista McQuarrie, who is here, and Marie Dillon did hundreds of interviews for those endorsements, spent countless hours on them, and we had a long discussion about that. Elaine is the point person in the House on pension reform. That has been a failure. She had an excellent candidate. We decided that the most valuable thing we could do in this, we didn't endorse a lot of incumbents. And that was when we said, Elaine, and we said, we value her, we've got a lot of, we like her. But House Democrats didn't even bring pension reform to a vote. At least the Senate brought it to a vote. So we thought you had to stand up and say there's something to accountability. They need to do it next time. Overall, is that good, or you want something?
No, that's good enough. Hey, listen,
Overall, we endorsed more Republicans than Democrats in the legislature, but it was not a partisan vote. There were a number of cases. Sandy Cole, valuable Republican legislator, had a really good opponent, a guy named Sam Yingling, and we endorsed her Democratic opponent. He won. So we really wanted to put more premium in saying you need some change in the legislature. I pointed out how many seats didn't even have opposition. So the election focused on a half dozen seats in the Senate and a dozen seats in the House. You weren't going to get change. It's very difficult to get change when everything is focused that narrowly.
Yeah. Well, and Christi, that goes back when you were toiling in the Capitol building. Okay. Do you think he did okay on that one? Yeah. All right. We'll let it go. Chris Long, to close, to bring us together in the last question. This is for everybody, and we'll give Bruce a chance to rest. Christi, we'll start with you. Does either President Obama or Speaker Boehner have a mandate to push their agenda?
I think they have a mandate to do something, and I think they have a mandate to work together. I do. I think I said this earlier, but I'll elaborate on it a little bit. It seems to me that there seems to be a recognition. The electorate didn't agree on a whole lot, but it sounded like people wanted some solutions, wanted some things done. And the change in tone that I mentioned earlier, I think, is pretty pervasive in Washington. People are a little off their kilter. They know they have to accomplish some things on and there are these deadlines looming to sort of get them going. Mandate, people aren't really throwing that word around a whole lot. Presidents in the past have gotten burned for doing that, so maybe that's why. But I still feel like the mandate is to collaborate, and that's the only thing people agree on.
Clarence.
This gives me an excuse to display something, which is the Onion's headline. The Onion headline: "Defeated Man Victorious." That is their one of their finest headlines since what was it, Black Guy Wins White House, wasn't it? Something like that. I think which is framed in many homes now. Obama wasn't a defeated man, but he was a weak candidate. So was Romney. I mean, these candidates were not inspirational in the sense of people really thinking they were going to transport and change everything. The Obama euphoria of 2008 wore off rather quickly, as it should. You got to face the realities of governing, and he faced those realities. I think he did a darn good job. He disappointed me in a bunch of areas. I think most of us would probably say that. And at the same time, Romney showed a lot of promise with his ideas. They were rather general, et cetera, and didn't get specific enough and didn't manage his campaign as well as he might have if he was more experienced on the national stage. But, Boehner, same situation. I happen to be born and raised in Boehner's district. He and I are about the same age, and he's a good old school country club Republican from a very Republican area. He is a deal maker. He's not a Tea Party person, but he is the speaker, and he has to deal with them, and he understands the realities of the situation. Christi is absolutely right. Both these guys have a mandate to do something. and not just to give us 4 more years of gridlock. If they do that, they both lose any positive aspect to their legacy. So I expect them to do something. Again, Churchill, you know, after all the alternatives have been exhausted, they'll do the right thing.
Yeah.
Kerry.
One man's compromise is another person's capitulation. So I think it's a question of how far either side is willing to go. President Obama really likes to remind people that he won the election. He did it famously in the health care negotiations that were painfully broadcast to the nation by telling John McCain, we had that vote and I won it, I'm the president. And he said something similar this past week. You know, the people knew what they were getting with me and they voted for me. So that's a hint of a bit of spine there that I think you're going to see. But I think he also knows that the pressure is on for him to get something done and not go over the cliff.
Bruce.
First person I saw on 7:30 Wednesday morning after the election in the Tribune newsroom was Dick Durbin. He said, "Congratulations on the election. What are you going to do on the debt?" And he said, "Don't worry." He said, "The president actually has a plan. He just couldn't talk about it during the campaign." Now, not to pick on Dick Durbin, because it was just a few hours later that John Boehner, whose candidate said he wouldn't take $10 in cuts for $1 in revenue, said, "Put revenue on the table." So I think we lost a year. We lost the year because we had to have a presidential election and have that narrative, but I think they'll make a deal.
Well, listen, to close, I mean, following Clarence Page, I'll have to quote Benjamin Disraeli. The palace isn't safe unless the cottages are happy. And I think that's going to be he said that to Queen Victoria. Michelle Obama, perhaps, who knows. Anyway, how about a big round of applause? Here you have